Ragers Champions of the Arena, a simple game published by Galacta and distributed by Ares. This is a two-player only card game, very simple, definitely a filler, plays in 10 minutes or so, 10-15 minutes. Rock, paper, scissors, meaning there is secret and simultaneous selection of action, but also a couple of extra effects and extra things that make things a little more interesting than just rock, paper, scissors. Each player controls a team of fighters. In this fantasy arena, you will send several fighters, about 5 in each encounter, then you decide who wins, how many points are scored, and after 3 rounds, the player with the highest total is the winner of the game. Now, the game comes with a very simple rulebook. It's not the shortest for a game that, again, is pretty much a slightly more developed version of rock, paper, scissors. There are a bunch of rules, unique effects, but nothing too bad. And then you have 4 decks of cards, 1 for each player. These cards will generate the combatants and the people that will interact in the arena. And then other 2 decks that will determine special conditions for each round. At the beginning of each round of combat, again, you will have usually 3 in the game, unless a player has a huge advantage over the other, then the game will be over sooner. But at the beginning of each round, typically 3, you flip a card face up from this deck. These cards represent what the crowd of yelling orcs is asking. These are the icons that the crowd wants to see. So if during a round of combat you play those icons, and sometimes that's all that matters. Sometimes also they don't want to see a certain icon. So in a card like this, if the crowd sees those icons, in a card such as this one, if they see that icon and not that one, the player that managed to fulfill these requirements scores the number of points. So this is just an opportunity for players to score some extra points based on what the crowd wants. And yeah, the patrons are a little more demanding. They don't give you points, they just dictate several conditions. And so at the beginning of each round, you flip a card face up. And that may change the length of the fight, may restrict combat, that is, that icon cannot be used. For example, that would be the restriction in this round. In this round, that icon cannot be used, and so on and so forth. So you have a little bit of variety here based on an opportunity to score some extra points and a restriction for certain cards that you cannot use. And then it's time for our players to play. Each player shuffles their deck. Incidentally, you see the back of each card is a player aid. There are a lot of icons, so that there's a lot of characters that can perform special actions, but the combat actions, the combat icons are only 3. The hammer, the sword, and the spear. The hammer wins against the sword against the spear, and the spear against the hammer. So that's very clear. So each player will draw a hand of cards from their deck of cards, and then each player will simultaneously select a card from their hand. Suppose that I'm sitting there, so I'm looking at my deck and say, oh, this is the best card I can play now. And then also you will get to refill your hand. And here I'm doing the same thing. I'm looking at my cards, I place one face down, and then what we do is that we reveal the cards. What is interesting is that combat icons for now don't do anything. It's fun to see, oh, hammer wins against sword, but right now they don't do anything. And I know that's unusual, but we'll see why that is so later. So combat icons just sit there. Special icons do other stuff. For example, this magician here will zap the opponent, and the card of the opponent right in front of that card will be placed face down. The veteran is a tricky guy, because after the cards are flipped, so you can take a combat card from your hand and place it in front of the veteran. Pretty much that means that the veteran gets a chance on top of the veteran. Pretty much that means that the veteran gets a chance of seeing what the opponent does before the veteran reveals his or her. Some combatants are female. before the veteran reveals his or her combat style. If I have a veteran, I could play that card there, or I could play this card there. The fact that you played on top of the veteran card is important because the number of cards that are played matters. If you play the archer, I wish I could find one. Actually, this one here, the changeling, simply counts as whatever is in front of the changeling, so now that counts as a hammer. The archer, you immediately get to play another card. That means that for all intents and purposes, the round will be one card shorter because the number of cards displayed also corresponds to the timer. If this is the situation, say then next time that we play a card, this player will need to play a card here, and this player here will play a card here. We reveal the cards, and again we resolve the effects. Oh, this magician is zapping this card here. We resolve the effects, and we continue like this until there are 5 cards in front of a player. They may be face up, face down, and remember the one on top of a veteran doesn't count as one. So when at least a player has 5 cards in front of themselves, the round is over. At that point, you look at the last combat icon that was scored, that was placed in the line, and that determines who wins. For example, if this is the situation, we'll look at the last icon only. We have a sword here and a spear there. And remember what happens here, sword wins against spear, so this player won this round. And you're thinking, wait a minute, what is the big deal? Why do we have to play 5 cards or more with the veteran to get there? Why don't just play a card, rock, paper, scissors, and see what happens? Well, here's the interesting thing, because then when we get to score, we see who has met the condition that the crowd wanted. So there's that. You may try to eliminate a card of the opponent when you think the opponent is playing a card that will allow them to satisfy the crowd and score those points. But then the winner will get to score not just the points that are on the card that actually won, but the points on each card with the same combat icon as the card that just won the combat. So actually this player, thanks to that card, is now scoring 6 points. And you take these cards and you place them in your scoring pile, so they also act as a reminder how many points you have. If that other player, suppose that other player had won that combat, because spear wins against hammer, that other player had won, that other player would only score 3 points because the player won with a spear and the player only has 1 spear here. So this card will go in the player's scoring pile. So now all of a sudden things become a little more interesting, because what it means here is that if I start playing a lot of spears, now you may wonder if in fact I'm gonna try to win with a spear that will score me a lot of points if I can pull it off. The more you build around a certain icon, the more visible your moves become, the easier it becomes to predict you. Unless, of course, you're bluffing, and maybe there is precisely that idea. You think I'm gonna play spears, then I think that precisely because of that, you're gonna play a sword, and thinking they're gonna play a spear to beat my sword, I'm actually gonna play a hammer here, which means I will only win, I'll win the combat, but I will only score 3 points because I maybe play a lot of spears and no hammers. So there is that I'm thinking that you're thinking that I'm thinking type of thing. But therefore there is this extra element of push your luck, or I should almost say build your luck, because you're signaling to the opponent what you may be doing. And yes, there is an unpredictable element here. There is a lot of luck here, because maybe I'm building this because I'm trying to bluff, but you have destroyed a certain a card that I used to build that situation. You managed to shorten the fight, and so actually now we're going to score before I expected that. So It's surprisingly interesting, I would say. I wasn't sure about this game because I thought, why do I have to play 5 cards for rock, paper, scissors? But those 5 cards, first there are dynamics that happen. Here's I try to figure out what you have, and I try to create some powerful combos. Some cards seem to be objectively more powerful than others, but then remember the patrons, maybe precisely because of that, saying, "Oh, sorry guys, no veterans this time," and you have 2 veterans in your hand, which maybe you have been saving there from previous rounds, and then of course it gets tricky. So between the patrons and the crowd, the possibility that you can score points by winning here and or by satisfying the crowds. The fact that you can mess up with the opponent will mess up with you, all of a sudden makes this build up to the final duel strangely rewarding, strangely satisfying, and definitely interesting. Again, mind you, there definitely is a major element of luck, or I should say, of lack of knowledge that for all intents and purposes works as luck, because technically of course the opponent is choosing the card that they are putting there, but I have no idea what that happens. I don't know much more about that than if I was to roll a dice. So it functionally works as luck, with some differences, because actually there will be times in which you can try to read the opponent, and the opponent, you remember the opponent's cards that were played, so you get a sense of what cards are still in their deck. So, and again, in a certain sense, it's like I'm trying to get a sense of the possibilities. You're still thinking in terms of randomness, limited knowledge, and how likely it is that certain things will happen, as you're also trying to bluff and to read the opponent. So there is that bluffing element, there is trying to read the intentions of the opponents and trying to, again, build your luck and push your luck a little bit. And also, yes, there is luck or quasi-luck, pseudo-luck going on during the game, but the game is so short. Again, when you know how it works, at the beginning, yes, you'll have to look up the icons and that will slow down your first game, but it's so simple that then really you can easily play it in 5-10 minutes, and that's the kind of game that, yes, if I lose just because of luck, I lose 2 games, well, that took us 10-15 minutes, I can still try to get, to get a little luckier the next game. So for a game that looks like advanced rock, paper, scissors, I find this one to be maybe unexpectedly, but satisfying and fun. Mind you, it's a small game, it's a simple game, a single filler, but as a filler, I found it to be one that was very enjoyable and definitely a fun filler. Ragers, Champions of the Arena by Galacta, distributed by Ares.